Sarah Martinez had never held a gun in her life. At 26, she worked as a graphic designer in downtown Austin, spending her days creating colorful advertisements for local businesses. Her biggest adventure was usually deciding between coffee shops for her morning latte. That Tuesday morning started like any other, until her phone buzzed with a message that would change everything. The text came from her college roommate Jessica, who now worked for a military contractor. "Hey girl, weird question. Want to come to a military demonstration this weekend? They need civilians for photos. Free food and you'd be helping with PR stuff. Super safe. Just standing around looking interested while they show off equipment." Sarah almost deleted the message. Military events weren't exactly her scene. She preferred art galleries to gun ranges, yoga classes to combat training. But work had been stressful lately, and the idea of getting out of the city for a weekend sounded appealing. Plus, Jessica mentioned they were paying participants a small fee, and Sarah's freelance income could use the boost. After thinking it over during lunch, she texted back, "What kind of demonstration exactly? And please tell me I don't have to wear camouflage." Jessica's response came quickly. "LOL, no camo required. It's a new sniper rifle system they're showing to potential buyers. Totally routine stuff. You'd just be in background shots, maybe hold some equipment for photos. Think of it as the world's most boring modeling gig." That Friday afternoon, Sarah packed a small bag with comfortable clothes and drove 3 hours to a remote military facility outside San Antonio. The place looked exactly like she'd imagined. Concrete buildings, chain-link fences, and serious-looking people in uniforms walking around with clipboards. Jessica met her at the main gate, grinning widely and wearing a visitor's badge. "You actually came. I wasn't sure you would," Jessica said, giving her a quick hug. "This is going to be so easy. The photographer just wants some shots of regular people interacting with the equipment to make it seem less intimidating for the marketing materials." They walked through several security checkpoints, each one making Sarah feel more out of place. Everyone else seemed to know exactly where they were going and what they were doing. She felt like a tourist who'd accidentally wandered into a restricted area. The other civilian volunteers were mostly friends or family members of military personnel, people who seemed comfortable around weapons and tactical gear. The demonstration was scheduled for Saturday morning on a firing range that stretched across several miles of desert landscape. Sarah spent Friday evening in a modest hotel nearby. Wondering what she'd gotten herself into, she called her mom, who was predictably worried about the whole situation. "Honey, are you sure this is safe? I mean, they're testing weapons," her mother said over the phone. "Maybe you should come home and we can have a nice quiet weekend instead." Sarah found herself defending her decision, even though part of her agreed with her mom's concerns. "It's perfectly safe, Mom. I'm just there for photos. I won't even be near the actual testing. Besides, it's good money for basically just standing around for a day." Saturday morning arrived gray and windy. Sarah met the other volunteers in the hotel lobby at 6 a.m., everyone looking slightly nervous and undercaffeinated. A military bus transported them to the testing facility, where they were briefed on basic safety rules and given protective gear. The photographer, a cheerful man named Marcus, explained what he needed. "We want to show that this new rifle system is user-friendly and accessible," Marcus told the group. "I'll need some shots of civilians examining the equipment, looking interested and engaged. Nothing complicated, just natural reactions to impressive technology." The sniper rifle in question was unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. It looked more like something from a science fiction movie than a traditional weapon: sleek black metal, computerized scope, and various attachments that she couldn't begin to identify. The military technicians handling it spoke in acronyms and technical terms that went completely over her head. As the morning progressed, Sarah found herself genuinely interested despite her initial reservations. The technology was undeniably impressive, even if its purpose made her uncomfortable. The rifle could apparently calculate wind speed, distance, and other factors automatically, making it easier for soldiers to hit distant targets accurately. During a break in the photo session, one of the technicians noticed Sarah studying the rifle's scope with genuine curiosity. "Want to take a closer look?" he offered. "It's pretty amazing what they can do with computers these days." Sarah nodded, stepping closer to examine the sophisticated optics system. She'd always been interested in how things worked, a trait that served her well in graphic design. The technician, Sergeant Rodriguez, began explaining how the scope's computer calculated various factors to help with accuracy. The whole point is to take some of the guesswork out of long-distance shooting, he explained. Still requires skill, but the technology helps compensate for things like wind and distance that used to require years of experience to master. As he spoke, Sarah found herself asking questions about the technical aspects. How did the computer know the wind speed? How accurate were the distance measurements? What happened if the target moved? Sergeant Rodriguez seemed pleased to have someone showing genuine interest in the engineering rather than just the weapons' destructive capability. The conversation was interrupted when Marcus called for the next round of photos. This time he wanted shots of volunteers actually holding the rifle, posed as if they were learning to use it. Don't worry, he assured them. The weapon isn't loaded and we'll have safety officers right there with you. When Sarah's turn came, she approached the rifle with a mixture of nervousness and curiosity that had been building all morning. The rifle was heavier than Sarah expected. As Sergeant Rodriguez helped position it in her hands, she was surprised by both its weight and the precision of its construction. Every surface seemed perfectly machined, every component exactly where it needed to be. It felt like holding an expensive piece of scientific equipment rather than a weapon. Okay, just like that, Marcus called out, adjusting his camera angle. Look through the scope like you're trying to see something in the distance. Perfect, hold that pose. Sarah peered through the scope and gasped quietly. The magnification was incredible. She could clearly see individual rocks and plants on a hillside over a mile away. The scope's display showed numbers and calculations she didn't understand, but the clarity of the image was stunning. For someone who worked with visual details every day, the precision of the optics was genuinely impressive. This is amazing, she said softly, not realizing Marcus was still taking photos. I can see everything so clearly. That's the idea, Sergeant Rodriguez replied. Military snipers need to be able to identify targets at extreme distances. This system makes that possible even in challenging conditions. As Sarah continued looking through the scope, she noticed something odd happening on the display. Numbers were changing and a small red dot appeared on the crosshairs. She was about to ask about it when Marcus finished his shots and moved on to the next volunteer. During lunch break, Sarah found herself sitting with some of the military personnel involved in the demonstration. They were surprisingly normal people, talking about their families, complaining about paperwork, discussing weekend plans. It was easy to forget they were experts in things she couldn't even imagine. You seemed pretty comfortable with the rifle earlier, commented Captain Williams, a sniper instructor who'd been observing the photo session. Most civilians are either terrified of it or treat it like a toy. You looked like you were actually trying to understand how it worked. Sarah laughed. I guess I was. I'm a graphic designer, so I'm naturally curious about how things are put together. The technology is fascinating, even if the purpose makes me a little uncomfortable. That's a healthy attitude, Captain Williams replied. Too many people either worship weapons or demonize them without understanding what they actually are. Tools that require skill, training, and responsibility to use properly. The conversation continued through lunch, with Sarah asking questions about military training, and the captain explaining some of the technical aspects of long-distance shooting. She learned about factors like bullet drop, wind drift, and atmospheric pressure, variables that could affect accuracy over long distances. It's not like in movies, Captain Williams explained. Real precision shooting requires understanding physics, mathematics, weather patterns, and human psychology. The best snipers are often people with strong analytical minds rather than just good hand-eye coordination. After lunch, the group moved to an observation area overlooking the main firing range. This was where the actual testing would take place. Live ammunition being fired at targets positioned at various distances across the desert landscape. Sarah felt her nervousness returning as the safety briefing became more serious. The targets were set up at distances ranging from 500 meters to over 3,000 meters. At the furthest distance, Sarah couldn't even see the targets with her naked eye, even though she knew approximately where they were located. The demonstration would show how the new rifle system performed at each distance, with military marksmen taking carefully measured shots. The record for this particular system is 3,487 meters, announced Major Patterson, the officer in charge of the demonstration. That was achieved during testing in Arizona last month. Today we're hoping to demonstrate consistent accuracy at distances up to 3,500 meters. Sarah found herself doing quick mental math. 3,500 meters was over 2 miles. The idea of hitting a target that far away seemed impossible, like something from a video game rather than reality. She watched through binoculars as the first marksman took position and began his calculations. The process was methodical and scientific. Wind measurements were taken using handheld devices. Weather data was recorded and entered into the rifle's computer system. Range cards with detailed information about each target distance were consulted. Everything was measured, calculated, and double-checked before any shots were fired. The first few shots at shorter distances were successful, hitting targets at 500, 800, and 1,200 meters with impressive accuracy. The sound of the rifle was sharp and authoritative, echoing across the desert landscape. Each successful hit was marked by a small puff of dust or debris visible through the spotting scopes. As the distances increased, the complexity of the calculations grew. At 2,000 meters, environmental factors became much more significant. A slight crosswind that wouldn't affect a shot at close range could push a bullet several feet off target at extreme distance. The rifle's computer system worked constantly, updating calculations based on changing conditions. This is where the technology really proves its worth, Sergeant Rodriguez explained to the group of observers. At these distances, traditional methods require years of experience to master. The computer system allows properly trained personnel to achieve accuracy that would otherwise take decades to develop. When they reached the 3,000-meter target, Sarah found herself holding her breath along with everyone else. This was the edge of what was considered possible with current technology. The marksman took extra time with his calculations, consulting with spotters and double-checking wind readings. The shot seemed to take forever to reach its target. Sarah counted silently. 1,001, 1,002, before the spotter called out, "Hit!" through his radio. Cheers erupted from the observation area, and even Sarah found herself applauding despite her mixed feelings about the demonstration. "Impressive," she admitted to Captain Williams. "I still don't completely understand how it's possible." "Physics and engineering," he replied with a smile. "Plus a lot of practice and attention to detail. The computer helps, but it still requires human skill to make it work." As the demonstration continued, Sarah noticed that several of the planned marksmen were having difficulty with the extreme distance shots. The conditions were becoming more challenging as afternoon winds picked up, and not every shot was finding its target. The technology was impressive, but it wasn't magic. During a brief pause in the shooting, Marcus approached her again. "I'd like to get a few more photos with the rifle if you don't mind. The lighting is perfect right now, and your natural curiosity made for some great shots earlier." Sarah agreed, finding herself more comfortable with the weapon now that she'd spent time around it. As she took position again with the rifle, she realized something had changed in her attitude toward the whole experience. As Marcus positioned his camera for another round of photos, Major Patterson approached the group with an unusual request. Two of the scheduled marksmen had developed equipment problems with their spotting scopes, and the afternoon wind conditions were proving more challenging than expected. Several shots at the maximum distance had missed their targets completely. "We're having some technical difficulties," the major announced to the observation group. "I know this is unconventional, but we're wondering if any of our civilian volunteers would be interested in attempting a shot for the cameras, obviously with full safety supervision and using the rifle's computer assistance." Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. The idea seemed both terrifying and strangely appealing. Around her, the other volunteers exchanged uncertain glances. Most seemed hesitant about the idea of actually firing such a powerful weapon, even under controlled conditions. "It would be completely safe," Major Patterson continued. "We'd start with a closer target, maybe 800 meters, and work up only if the volunteer was comfortable. The rifle's computer system does most of the calculations automatically, so it's really more about following instructions than having shooting experience." Jessica, who had been quiet most of the day, surprised everyone by speaking up. "Sarah's been asking great questions all day. She seems really interested in understanding how everything works." All eyes turned to Sarah, who felt her face flush with embarrassment and excitement. The logical part of her mind was screaming that this was a terrible idea. She was a graphic designer from Austin, not a soldier or marksman. But another part of her was genuinely curious about whether she could actually hit a target using this advanced technology. "I don't know," Sarah said hesitantly. "I've never fired a gun before in my life, Isn't that kind of important for something like this? Captain Williams stepped forward with an encouraging smile. Actually, sometimes complete beginners do better than experienced shooters when using this system. They don't have old habits to overcome, and they're more likely to trust the computer's calculations completely. Sergeant Rodriguez nodded in agreement. The rifle does most of the work. Your job would be to follow the breathing techniques we teach you, squeeze the trigger smoothly, and trust the technology. We'd be right there guiding you through every step. Sarah looked around at the faces, watching her expectantly. Marcus had his camera ready, obviously hoping she'd agree to the dramatic photo opportunity. The military personnel seemed genuinely interested in seeing how their system performed with a complete novice. Even the other volunteers were encouraging her to try. What exactly would I need to do? She asked, surprised by her own willingness to consider the proposal. Major Patterson explained the process step by step. First, she'd receive basic instruction on rifle safety and handling. Then they'd start with a relatively close target at 800 meters to build confidence. If she was successful and comfortable, they might attempt progressively longer shots, potentially working up to the maximum demonstration distance of 3,500 meters. The rifle's computer system will calculate bullet drop, wind compensation, and atmospheric corrections automatically, he explained. Your main responsibilities would be to position yourself correctly, control your breathing, and squeeze the trigger smoothly when the system indicates optimal conditions. Sarah found herself nodding along as he spoke. The analytical part of her mind was already engaged, thinking through the process like a complex design problem. She'd always been good at following detailed instructions and paying attention to small details, skills that apparently translated to precision shooting. Okay, she said finally, surprising herself with the decision. I'll try it, but you have to promise to stop me if I'm doing anything dangerous or stupid. The next hour was spent in intensive basic training. Sergeant Rodriguez taught her proper rifle handling, how to position her body for stability, and basic breathing techniques for accuracy. Captain Williams explained how to read the rifle's computer display and what the various numbers and indicators meant. The key is to trust the system, Captain Williams emphasized. When the computer says the conditions are optimal, you'll see a green indicator on the scope. That's when you slowly squeeze the trigger. Don't jerk it or rush. Just gradual, steady pressure until the rifle fires. Sarah practiced the breathing and trigger techniques with an unloaded rifle, getting comfortable with the weight and feel of the weapon. To her surprise, it began to feel natural relatively quickly. The rifle's ergonomic design and adjustable components made it easier to handle than she'd expected. You're a natural, commented Sergeant Rodriguez after watching her practice session. Your body position is stable and you're not fighting the rifle's weight. That's harder to teach than you might think. As they moved to the firing line for her first live shot, Sarah felt a mixture of excitement and terror. The 800-meter target looked impossibly small through the rifle scope, even with maximum magnification. But the computer display was showing clear readings for wind speed, distance, and atmospheric conditions. Remember, Captain Williams said as he took position beside her as spotter, the rifle knows where the bullet needs to go. Your job is just to hold steady and squeeze smoothly when you see the green light. Sarah took a deep breath and settled into position behind the rifle. Through the scope, she could see the target clearly, a large white circle with black rings marking scoring zones. The computer's crosshairs were positioned slightly above and to the left of the target center, compensating for bullet drop and wind drift. Take your time, Major Patterson said from behind her. There's no rush. Fire when you're ready and the conditions look good. Sarah focused on her breathing just as she'd been taught, in and out, steadying her heart rate and calming her nerves. The rifle felt solid and stable in her hands. The computer display showed green indicators for wind and atmospheric conditions. Everything seemed ready. On her exhale, she began to slowly increase pressure on the trigger. The rifle's mechanism was smoother than she'd expected, with no sudden breaking point. The shot surprised her when it finally fired, the recoil pushing back against her shoulder but not as violently as she'd feared. Hit, called the spotter over the radio. Center ring. Cheers erupted from the observation area behind her. Sarah looked up from the scope in amazement, hardly believing what had just happened. She'd actually hit a target at 800 meters on her first shot. Marcus was frantically taking photos, capturing her expression of shock and delight. That was incredible, she said, grinning widely. Can we try a longer distance? Major Patterson and Captain Williams exchanged glances. Sarah's success at 800 meters was impressive, but attempting longer shots would be much more challenging, even with computer assistance. Still, her natural ability and the rifle's advanced technology made it worth considering. "Let's try 200 meters, Captain Williams decided. "If you're successful there, we can discuss going further." As they adjusted the rifle's settings for the longer distance, Sarah realized she was no longer nervous. The combination of advanced technology and proper instruction had given her confidence she never expected to feel while holding a weapon. She was beginning to understand why precision shooting was considered as much art as science. The 200-meter target was significantly more challenging. Through the rifle scope, it appeared much smaller, and Sarah could see heat waves rising from the desert floor that would affect the bullet's path. The computer system was working harder now, constantly updating its calculations as wind conditions shifted across the long distance to the target. "At this range, timing becomes more important," Captain Williams explained. "Wind conditions can change during the bullet's flight time, so we need to fire when everything looks optimal." Sarah studied the scope's display more carefully this time. She was beginning to understand the various readouts: wind speed and direction at different points along the bullet's path, atmospheric pressure corrections, and temperature adjustments. The technology was doing complex calculations that would take a human expert considerable time to work out manually. "The computer is showing variable winds," she observed, watching the numbers fluctuate on the display. "When should I take the shot?" "Good question," Sergeant Rodriguez replied. "Wait for a moment when the wind readings stabilize across all measurement points. You'll see the indicators turn green when conditions are optimal." Sarah settled into her shooting position again, this time with more confidence but also greater awareness of the complexity involved. The 800-meter shot had been successful partly due to beginner's luck. But this longer distance would be a real test of both her newly learned skills and the rifle's capabilities. Minutes passed as she waited for optimal conditions. The wind seemed to be constantly shifting, with different speeds and directions at various points between her position and the target. Sarah found herself fascinated by how much the environment affected long-distance shooting, factors she'd never considered before today. "There," Captain Williams said quietly, watching his own monitoring equipment. "Wind is settling down. You should see green indicators in a few seconds." Sarah watched the scope display intently. One by one, the wind indicators turned green as conditions stabilized. The computer's crosshairs shifted slightly, adjusting for the current environmental factors. Everything seemed aligned perfectly. She controlled her breathing as she'd been taught, exhaling slowly and beginning her trigger squeeze at the natural pause in her respiratory cycle. The rifle fired smoothly and she maintained her position to watch the bullet's impact through the scope. "Hit," came the spotter's call after what seemed like an eternity. "Outer ring, but definite hit." The observation group erupted in applause again, this time with even more enthusiasm. Sarah had now successfully engaged targets at both 800 and 2,200 meters, distances that would challenge experienced marksmen. Marcus was documenting everything with his camera, clearly thrilled with the dramatic story unfolding. "I can't believe I actually did that," Sarah said, sitting back from the rifle with a huge grin. "This morning I'd never even held a gun, and now I'm hitting targets over a kilometer away." Major Patterson approached with a serious expression that made Sarah wonder if she'd done something wrong. Instead, he surprised her with an unexpected proposition. "Sarah, your natural ability with this system is remarkable," he said. "We're scheduled to attempt the maximum demonstration distance of 3,500 meters. Our experienced marksmen have been having difficulty with the changing conditions today. Would you be interested in making the attempt?" Sarah felt her stomach flip with excitement and terror. 3,500 meters was over 2 miles, the extreme edge of what was considered possible even with the most advanced technology. The target at that distance would be barely visible even through the powerful scope. "Is it safe?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The safety protocols had been thorough, and she was beginning to trust the professionalism of the military personnel surrounding her. "Completely safe," Captain Williams assured her. "The only difference is the complexity of the calculations and the time required for the bullet to reach the target. If you're comfortable with the process, the rifle can handle the technical challenges." Sarah looked around at the faces watching her expectantly. Jessica was beaming with pride, clearly amazed at her friend's unexpected talent. The military personnel seemed genuinely interested in seeing how their advanced system would perform, with a complete novice at extreme range. "What would happen if I miss?" she asked practically. "Nothing dramatic," Sergeant Rodriguez replied with a smile. "The target area is completely clear, and we're firing into empty desert beyond. Missing just means we don't get the demonstration shot we're hoping for." The decision felt surprisingly easy. Sarah had come this far, learned this much, and discovered abilities she never knew she had. The analytical part of her mind, that had always served her well in graphic design, was engaged with the technical challenge of extreme distance shooting. "Let's try it," she said with more confidence than she felt. The preparation for the 3D 500-meter shot was extensive. Additional wind measurement equipment was deployed at various points between the firing position and the target. Weather data was updated and fed into the rifle's computer system. Even the rotation of the Earth became a factor at this extreme distance, something called the Coriolis effect that Sarah had heard about in science classes but never thought would be relevant to her life. "At this distance, the bullet will be in flight for several seconds," Major Patterson explained. "Environmental conditions can change during that time, so timing becomes critical. The computer system accounts for predicted changes, but there's still an element of uncertainty." Sarah found herself studying the various displays and readouts with intense concentration. She was beginning to understand the interconnected nature of all the variables involved: wind, temperature, humidity, atmospheric pressure, even the exact distance to the target measured by laser rangefinder. "The technology is incredible," she commented while they waited for optimal conditions. "But it still requires human judgment and skill to use effectively." "Exactly right," Captain Williams replied. "The computer eliminates much of the guesswork, but successful shooting still requires understanding, patience, and proper execution. You're demonstrating all three quite naturally." As they made final preparations, Sarah realized that something fundamental had changed in her attitude toward both the technology and her own capabilities. She discovered an aptitude for precision and analytical thinking that translated surprisingly well to this technical challenge. The morning's nervousness had been replaced by focused concentration and genuine excitement about pushing the limits of what was possible. The 3,500-meter target was barely visible even through the rifle's powerful scope. Sarah could make out the general shape of the target frame, but the actual scoring rings were impossible to distinguish at that distance. She would be relying entirely on the computer's calculations and her newly learned shooting techniques. "Remember," Captain Williams said as they prepared for the final shot, "at this distance everything we've practiced becomes even more important. Breathing control, smooth trigger operation, and trusting the system completely." Sarah nodded, settling into her shooting position with the confidence gained from her previous successful shots. The rifle felt familiar now, like a precision instrument she was learning to master rather than an intimidating weapon to be feared. The atmosphere around the firing line had become notably more tense as word spread about the 3,500-meter attempt. Additional personnel had gathered in the observation area, including several senior officers who had driven out from the main facility specifically to witness the demonstration. Sarah could feel the weight of their attention, but surprisingly, it focused rather than intimidated her. "Wind conditions are stabilizing," reported the meteorologist who had been monitoring weather data throughout the afternoon. "We're looking at a window of optimal conditions in approximately 5 minutes. Sarah used the time to review everything she'd learned during her crash course in precision shooting. Breathing control was critical. She needed to fire during the natural pause in her respiratory cycle. Trigger squeeze had to be smooth and gradual, avoiding any jerky movements that could throw off her aim. Most importantly, she needed to trust the rifle's computer system completely, even when its calculations seemed to defy common sense. "The crosshairs will be positioned well above the target," Captain Williams reminded her. "At this distance, bullet drop is significant, even with a high-velocity round. Don't second-guess the computer's calculations." Through the scope, Sarah could barely make out the target frame in the distance. Heat waves rising from the desert floor created a shimmering effect that made precise aiming seem impossible. But the rifle's advanced optics and computer systems were designed to compensate for exactly these kinds of challenging conditions. "I have to ask," Sarah said while they waited, "what's the record for this particular rifle system?" 3,487 meters, Major Patterson replied. "Set during testing in Arizona last month by one of our most experienced marksmen. Today we're attempting 3,500 meters, which would be a new record if successful. Sarah felt a moment of panic. Not only was she attempting an extremely difficult shot with virtually no experience, but she was potentially trying to set a new record with equipment she'd only learned to use that morning. The pressure should have been overwhelming, but instead she found herself oddly calm. No pressure, right? She joked, earning chuckles from the personnel around her. Actually, your lack of pressure might be an advantage, Sergeant Rodriguez observed. Experienced shooters sometimes overthink shots at extreme distance. You're just following the process we taught you, which might be exactly what's needed. The wind measurement equipment showed conditions continuing to stabilize. Sarah watched the rifle's computer display as it processed data from multiple sensors positioned between her location and the distant target. The calculations were incredibly complex, accounting for factors she was only beginning to understand. Wind is optimal, announced the meteorologist, beginning countdown for firing window. Sarah settled into her final shooting position, adjusting her body for maximum stability. The rifle's stock fit comfortably against her shoulder now, and her grip felt natural and secure. She'd learned to work with the weapon's weight rather than fighting it, using its mass to help steady her aim. Environmental conditions green across all measurement points, called out the technical specialist monitoring the computer systems. Rifle calculations complete and locked. Through the scope, Sarah could see the crosshairs positioned significantly above the barely visible target. The computer's calculations seemed almost absurd, aiming so far above where she wanted the bullet to hit. But she'd learned to trust the technology's ability to predict the complex physics involved in extreme distance shooting. Wind holding steady, the meteorologist confirmed. Firing window is open. Sarah began her breathing routine, slowing her heart rate and steadying her position behind the rifle. The scope's image seemed to stabilize as her body relaxed into the proper shooting stance. All the environmental indicators on the computer display showed green, indicating optimal conditions for the shot. Remember, the bullet flight time will be approximately 4 seconds, Captain Williams said quietly. Don't move from your position until well after impact. Maintain your sight picture throughout. Sarah nodded slightly, focusing entirely on the scope's crosshairs and the computer's targeting solution. Everything seemed to fade away except the technical challenge in front of her. Years of graphic design work had taught her to focus intensely on precise details, and that skill was serving her well in this completely different context. She exhaled slowly, reaching the natural pause in her breathing cycle. The trigger felt smooth and familiar under her finger. All the indicators were green. Environmental conditions were optimal. The computer had calculated its solution based on dozens of variables she couldn't even comprehend. Sarah began her trigger squeeze, applying steady pressure just as she'd been taught. The rifle's mechanism was precise and predictable, with no sudden breakpoint to surprise her. The shot seemed to surprise her even though she was expecting it, exactly as Captain Williams had said it should. The recoil was sharper than her previous shots, but Sarah maintained her position behind the scope as instructed. Through the powerful optics, she could see the bullet's vapor trail extending toward the distant target. At this extreme range, there would be a noticeable delay before impact. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004. She counted silently, watching the target area through the scope. The silence seemed to stretch endlessly. Everyone in the observation area was holding their breath, waiting for the spotter's call. Sarah kept her eye to the scope, watching for any sign of impact at the target location. Hit, came the electrifying call over the radio. Dead center! Direct hit at 3,500 meters. The observation area exploded with cheers and applause. Sarah sat back from the rifle in complete shock, hardly believing what had just happened. She'd not only hit the target at extreme range, but apparently scored a direct center hit that even experienced marksmen would be proud of. Marcus was frantically taking photos, capturing her expression of amazement and disbelief. Military personnel were shaking hands and congratulating each other on the successful demonstration. Jessica was jumping up and down with excitement, clearly thrilled for her friend's incredible achievement. I can't believe that actually worked, Sarah said, her voice shaking with adrenaline and excitement. Did that really just happen? You just set a new record, Major Patterson announced with a huge grin. 3,500 meters with a direct center hit. That's the longest confirmed shot with this rifle system, achieved by someone who'd never fired a gun before today. Sarah looked around at all the celebrating faces, Still processing the magnitude of what had just occurred, she'd come to the demonstration as a reluctant volunteer, looking for a weekend distraction from her normal routine. Instead, she'd discovered a natural aptitude for something she'd never imagined herself capable of doing. The technical achievement was impressive, but what struck her most was how the experience had changed her understanding of her own capabilities and interests. The morning's nervousness and uncertainty had been replaced by confidence and genuine fascination with the technology and skill involved in precision shooting. The celebration continued for several minutes as personnel from across the facility gathered to congratulate Sarah on her remarkable achievement. Word of the record-breaking shot had spread quickly through the military base, bringing curious onlookers who wanted to meet the civilian who had accomplished something that seasoned marksmen found challenging. "Ma'am, I've been shooting competitively for 15 years, said Staff Sergeant Martinez, one of the facility's instructors. "What you just did is genuinely extraordinary. Most people couldn't make that shot with months of training." Sarah found herself overwhelmed by the attention and praise. She'd never been comfortable being the center of attention, preferring to work behind the scenes on her graphic design projects. But the genuine enthusiasm and respect from these military professionals was both humbling and exciting. Major Patterson approached with a serious expression that indicated official business. "Sarah, I need to ask you some questions about your background. What you've accomplished today is significant enough that it needs to be properly documented." Over the next hour, Sarah found herself being interviewed by various personnel about her experience, background, and interests. They wanted to understand how someone with no shooting experience could perform so exceptionally with advanced precision equipment. Her answers seemed to surprise them. Her analytical approach to learning, attention to detail from design work, and natural mechanical aptitude had all contributed to her success. "Have you ever considered a career in the military?" asked Colonel Henderson, who had arrived from the main base specifically to meet her. "Your natural abilities combined with proper training could lead to some very interesting opportunities." Sarah laughed, still finding the whole situation surreal. "This morning I was worried about holding a gun for photos. I never imagined I'd be having conversations about military careers." But as she spoke, she realized the idea wasn't as far-fetched as it might have seemed 12 hours earlier. The technical challenges involved in precision shooting had engaged her mind in ways that her regular work sometimes didn't. The combination of advanced technology, mathematical precision, and skilled execution appealed to her analytical nature. "I'm not suggesting you enlist tomorrow," Colonel Henderson continued, "but there are civilian contractor positions that might interest someone with your apparent aptitudes. Companies that develop and test advanced systems often need people who can bridge the gap between pure technology and practical application." Marcus had been documenting the entire afternoon with his camera, and he approached Sarah with obvious excitement about the story that had unfolded. "This is going to make an incredible article," he said. "The photos tell an amazing progression from nervous beginner to record-setting marksman in just a few hours. You're planning to publish this?" Sarah asked, suddenly aware that her unexpected afternoon adventure might become much more public than she'd anticipated. "With your permission, absolutely," Marcus replied. "This is exactly the kind of story that shows how advanced technology can enable remarkable achievements. It's perfect for the marketing materials, but it's also just a great human interest story." Sarah considered the implications. Having her face and story associated with military weapons wasn't something she'd ever expected or particularly wanted. But she also recognized that her experience demonstrated something positive about both human potential and technological advancement. As the afternoon wound down, several people approached Sarah with business cards and contact information. Defense contractors, training facilities, and even competitive shooting organizations wanted to stay in touch. The shooting sports world, she learned, was always interested in discovering natural talent. "You should seriously consider trying competitive long-range shooting," suggested Dr. Stevens, a civilian contractor who designed ballistic software. "There are leagues and competitions that focus on precision rather than military applications. Your natural ability combined with some proper training could take you very far." Jessica, who had been watching the whole afternoon with amazement, finally pulled Sarah aside for a private conversation. "I can't believe what I just witnessed," she said. "When I invited you out here, I thought you'd be bored and want to leave early. Instead, you've completely blown everyone's minds." "I'm still processing it all myself," Sarah admitted. This morning I was Sarah, the graphic designer. Now I'm apparently Sarah who sets marksmanship records. It doesn't feel real yet. As they prepared to leave the facility, Major Patterson approached with one final surprise. Sarah, the Army has a policy of recognizing exceptional civilian contributions to our demonstrations and testing programs. I'd like to present you with a certificate of appreciation for your participation and achievement today. The brief ceremony was simple but meaningful. Standing in front of the advanced rifle system that had enabled her success, Sarah received formal recognition for setting a new distance record with the experimental weapon system. Marcus captured the moment with photos that would later become part of the official documentation of the rifle's capabilities. This certificate represents more than just a good shot, Major Patterson explained during the presentation. It demonstrates that advanced technology, when properly designed, can enable ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results. That's exactly what we hope to accomplish with systems like this. As they drove back toward Austin that evening, Sarah found herself constantly replaying the day's events. She'd discovered abilities she never knew she had, gained respect from people she'd never expected to meet, and opened doors to possibilities she'd never considered. So what happens now? Jessica asked as they stopped for dinner. Are you going to take up shooting as a hobby? Maybe accept one of those job offers? Sarah laughed, but the question was serious. The day had genuinely changed something in her understanding of herself and her capabilities. The technical challenges of precision shooting had engaged her mind in ways that felt both familiar and completely new. I honestly don't know, she replied. This morning I would have said absolutely not to any of this. Now I'm actually curious about learning more. Maybe I'll look into some of the civilian competition options people mentioned. The drive home gave her time to process not just what had happened, but what it might mean for her future. She'd always been someone who preferred predictable routines and familiar challenges, but the afternoon had shown her that stepping outside her comfort zone could lead to discoveries about herself that were both surprising and exciting. By the time they reached Austin, Sarah had made at least one decision. She was going to research the competitive shooting opportunities that several people had mentioned, not necessarily to change careers or make any dramatic life decisions, but to explore this unexpected interest and see where it might lead. The business cards from the afternoon were still in her pocket, representing possibilities she couldn't have imagined 24 hours earlier. 3 months after the demonstration, Sarah's life had changed in ways she never could have predicted. The story of her record-breaking shot had been published in military trade magazines and picked up by mainstream media, making her something of a minor celebrity in both shooting sports and technology circles. But more importantly, the experience had opened her eyes to possibilities she'd never considered. She'd kept her graphic design business running, but had also begun exploring the world of precision shooting sports. The local competitive shooting club had welcomed her enthusiastically, and she discovered a community of people who shared her fascination with the technical aspects of long-range accuracy. The analytical skills that served her well in design work translated perfectly to the mathematical precision required for competitive shooting. I never expected to find this interesting, Sarah told her shooting coach, retired Marine sniper Tom Wilson, during one of her weekly training sessions. But there's something addictive about the problem-solving aspect of it. Tom nodded knowingly. That's what separates good shooters from great ones. The best precision shooters are usually people who love puzzles and technical challenges. The shooting is almost secondary to the mental game. Sarah had also begun consulting work with several defense contractors, helping them understand how to make advanced systems more user-friendly for operators with varying levels of experience. Her unique perspective as someone who had learned to use sophisticated equipment quickly had proved valuable in system design and user interface development. Your experience that day has been incredibly useful for our development team, explained Dr. Stevens during a video conference about a new targeting system. Having someone who learned from scratch document the learning process helps us design better training protocols and more intuitive interfaces. The consulting work was both lucrative and fascinating, combining her design background with her newfound understanding of precision shooting technology. She discovered a niche market for professionals who could bridge the gap between advanced technology and practical application. Marcus had followed up on his promise to document her story, and the resulting article had led to speaking opportunities at technology conferences and shooting sports events. Sarah found herself becoming an advocate for the idea that advanced technology could enable ordinary people to achieve extraordinary results when properly designed and implemented. The key insight from my experience, she told audiences, is that user-friendly doesn't mean dumbed down. The rifle system I used was incredibly sophisticated, but the interface was designed to present complex calculations in a way that someone could learn quickly. That's good design philosophy, whether you're talking about weapons systems or smartphone apps. Her personal shooting had continued to improve with regular practice and proper coaching. She'd competed in several long-range precision competitions, consistently placing well against much more experienced shooters. The natural aptitude she'd discovered that first day had proved to be genuine and sustainable with proper development. "You've got the potential to compete at national levels," Tom told her after she'd won her division at a regional competition. "Your progress in 3 months is what most people achieve in 3 years." The combination of natural ability and analytical approach is rare. Sarah had also maintained connections with the military personnel from the original demonstration. Major Patterson had kept her informed about the continued development and deployment of the rifle system she'd tested. Her record shot had become part of the weapon's official performance documentation, and her story was used in training materials to illustrate the system's user-friendly design. "That shot you made has been seen by generals and defense officials around the world," Major Patterson told her during a phone call. "It's become one of our best examples of how advanced technology can enable rapid skill development. You've contributed to some significant procurement decisions." The experience had also changed Sarah's perspective on her own capabilities and willingness to try new things. She'd always been someone who stuck to familiar territories, but the success she'd found in such an unexpected area had made her more open to other new experiences and challenges. "I used to think I knew what I was good at and what I wasn't," she reflected to Jessica over coffee. "But that day showed me that you never really know what you're capable of until you try. It's made me more adventurous in general." Jessica smiled, remembering her friend's initial reluctance to attend the demonstration. "I still can't believe that my invitation to a boring military event turned into you becoming a competitive shooter and technology consultant. It's like something from a movie." Sarah's family had initially been concerned about her new interest in shooting sports, but had come to understand and support her passion for the technical challenges involved. Her parents had even attended one of her competitions, finally seeing firsthand that precision shooting was more about mathematics and engineering than violence. "I'm proud of how you've approached this whole thing," her father told her after watching her compete. "You've found something you're genuinely passionate about and turned it into opportunities I never would have imagined." As Sarah looked back on that pivotal Saturday morning, she marveled at how a simple decision to help a friend had led to such significant changes in her life. She'd discovered talents she didn't know she had, found a community she never expected to join, and opened career paths she'd never considered. The business cards from that first day had led to ongoing relationships and opportunities. Dr. Stevens had become a regular consulting client. Colonel Henderson had connected her with other advanced technology projects. Even Marcus continued to document her competitive shooting achievements for his ongoing series about technology and human performance. "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just stayed home that weekend," Sarah mused during one of her training sessions. "My whole life trajectory changed because I was curious enough to try something completely outside my comfort zone." Tom loaded another round into the practice rifle they were using. "That's the thing about breakthrough moments. You usually don't recognize them when they're happening. You just have to stay open to possibilities and be willing to see where they lead." Sarah settled into her shooting position, now as comfortable behind a precision rifle as she'd once been behind a computer screen. The target was 2,800 meters away, a distance that would have seemed impossible just a few months earlier, but now felt routine. She'd come a long way from the nervous graphic designer who'd reluctantly agreed to pose for photos. As she prepared to take her shot, Sarah reflected on how much her life had expanded beyond her original expectations. The analytical skills that had served her well in design work had found new application in precision shooting and technology consulting. The confidence she'd gained from unexpected success had made her more willing to explore other new challenges and opportunities. The shot broke clean and true, another successful hit at long range. But more than the technical achievement, it represented something larger. the ongoing journey of discovery that had begun with a simple willingness to try something new. Sarah's story had become proof that sometimes the most significant opportunities come disguised as ordinary invitations to step outside your comfort zone.